Don't you worry, the clip's about to begin, but don't forget to subscribe. Or else, don't make me turn this website around.
And we will move on to Melody. Hi, Melody.
Shannon and Katy, how are you?
Good, thank you. What would you like to talk about today?
I wanted your take on the prophets, possibly like the revelations and everything that they said they saw and heard being part of psychosis or mental illness, because I see that I've heard that a lot of symptoms can be actually like religious, where people actually believe they're prophets. So I wanted your take on that and what you thought about that.
Whether people prophesying is a sign of psychosis?
No,
is that what you're asking?
Like Jesus, for example, or Moses, or anyone who heard like God's voice. Like it could just I think that maybe it was just like psychosis.
I think it would be dangerous to start retroactively ascribing psychiatric disorders based on limited information, and it's not something that I even engage in as a speculation generally. But so to answer your question, can hearing voices be a manifestation that would be concerning and worth investigating, or a potential sign of psychosis? Certainly, yes, it could. Is hearing voice absolutely it could. Right? So I'll just say that outright. Absolutely, it could. And I'm not a diagnostician as well. So you need to take that into account. That is not my realm of psychology. My degree is in something completely different. It's in cognition and communication theory. So this is something that I am familiar with and studied a little bit, but it's not my specialty. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. It's just somebody who's an enthusiastic follower of the science, not somebody who's a professional in the field. But it becomes dangerous when you start doing retroactive diagnoses, because then people could see somebody else engaging in similar sort of behavior and stigmatize them, for example. And that is dangerous. Like starting to prescribe psychiatric disorders as a reason for behavior to excuse that behavior, or to write it off as being, for lack of a better word, to write it off as being crazy, and I air quotes there, because that seems like what some people maybe attempt to do, is potentially damaging and stigmatizing also. So I don't know. I guess, the hearing voices could be a sign of psychosis, is not always a sign of psychosis. And when people profess that they have heard voices, they're not always being truthful, so perhaps it couldn't be a sign. And there are instances where people attribute a proportion of their internal monologue, the attributions of somebody that they're expecting to hear. We all have, well, not all of us, some people don't, it's a rare condition, but most of us have an internal monologue where we kind of hear ourselves in our mind. And that can sometimes be misattributed, even though it's a natural component. And then that's not a form of psychosis, it's a form of disordered thinking. And because it's a form of disordered thinking, it's not even necessarily a sign of a mental health condition. It's just a sign of external influences affecting the human condition. So, yeah, I don't know if that helped to answer or just
thank you for your take.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead, Katy.
Well,
thank you so much.
Sorry, I missed that.
I think she's just saying thank you. Go ahead, Katy. I think you're good.
Okay. So I guess I would add from a totally different angle, not being an expert on this kind of thing like Shannon is. It is possible, but I think like as an argument, it's not very good. It's not very useful like we could say, oh yeah, everyone I disagree with, maybe they're all mentally ill. Maybe all of the religious people in history were all mentally ill. Like it doesn't really add anything unless you're trying to study the mental conditions of historical figures or something as a specific goal. From an atheist position, or from like addressing whether the claims that they're making are true, it doesn't really add anything because we don't have any more evidence. Like, yeah, they could have all been mentally, or maybe they were all aliens, or maybe it was all a dream, or maybe it's all an exaggeration. It could be any of those things, or all of those things, or a combination of those things. And it does just kind of, especially when you're talking to people about it, and they're like, "My prophet said this," and then you're like, "Oh, well, he was just mentally ill." Like, what? That's not going to convince them of anything. Yeah, and it's really bad, because there's such a common, like, sort of I'm an atheist and I'm 16 and now I think I know everything kind of position, is like all religious people are mentally ill, and it's nonsense because it's just factually false. It's also insulting both to like religious people and mentally ill people, saying that like your two things are the same, and like it's a kind of a derogatory way of looking at it, and it's just like they could like Moses could have been mentally ill and still have heard from God and still be the prophet that he says he is. Like that's still possible. Just him being mentally ill doesn't instantly discredit what he's saying. What discredits, or what discredits what he allegedly said, is we don't have real evidence for it, or good evidence for it. So yeah,
I'm always very hesitant. Sorry. I was just going to say, I'm always very hesitant to say,
Thank you. I never thought about it.
to assign somebody the attributes of mental illness in order to dismiss what they say. I think that's a dangerous road to go down.
Yes, definitely.
And almost, I'm not saying this is what you're doing, Melody, but the reason I'm so adamant about it is because what people do it very frequently. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying this is what you're doing. So I get my ire up when I even hear something that may go down the road to that argument and need to make the point. So
Yeah.
I hope you don't think that it just dawned on me that you didn't say that at all. You just asked me what I thought. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
No, it's fine. Thank you so much. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. I thought it would be more logical to say that they had a mental illness instead of saying, oh, it's supernatural,
I mean, well, we
But
know
now,
for a fact.
I'm thinking about it.
We know for a fact. Sorry, we know for a fact that mental illnesses do exist, and we know for a fact that some people with mental illnesses do hear, voices or whatever, and we don't know for a fact that supernatural exists. So, by those two facts alone, you could argue, oh, it's more likely because we actually have evidence. But I don't really think that kind of holds up as a position, and also you're neglecting all of the other possibilities, some of which might seem more likely, and then also just because something's more likely, like in this historical context, it doesn't. That's not
right. Doesn't
really
make it true.
For it either. It's not an argument on its own. So I mean, would we say if they were the only two choices, which one sounds more credible? Like, yeah, I guess so. But I think just things being exaggerated is probably, that seems more reasonable than either of those two positions. So, yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the best way to look at reviewing evidence.
Yeah. I agree
Thanks,
with that.
Katie. Thanks, you guys.
Does
I'm
that
going to let
help,
you
Melody?
guys go, but thank you so much for your take. I'm going to think about it and, think twice. And thank you so much.
No
Yeah,
problem.
you're welcome. Thank you for going in. I appreciate it. All right.
Okay. Take care, you guys.
Bye. I get my ire up about that one sometimes because when I hear
Yeah,
it,
I know.
I'm like, I don't even think that people have bad intentions, because like you said, given those two options, like something we don't know exists versus a phenomenon that we know we see, like if you just juxtapose those two, then sure, it makes sense. But when we're looking back historically at people we didn't have access to, whose stories were likely embellished, if they existed at all, using that as an argument to refute the validity of their experience
Doesn't add anything.
Doesn't add anything, because like you made a wonderful point there, that it could be true that they have psychosis and also did hear the voice of God. Like, it doesn't negate that. So the only reason to bring up the argument, to me, sometimes seems like, well, you can just write them off as being mentally ill, and then you don't have to take that experience seriously because they're mentally ill.
Yeah, exactly.
I have very strong feelings about pursuing that as an avenue, and why I don't like it. I don't know. Do you think I'm way off base there?
No, I totally agree. And it's something that I see a lot when I'm arguing for LGBT rights on the internet, which, like, so often people will just be like, well, they're mentally ill. And that's the whole argument. And you're like, well, firstly, being LGBT isn't a mental illness. And secondly, even if they were mentally ill, what does that mean? Like, mental illness is just like, a categorization of, certain conditions that humans can be. But that doesn't mean you're no longer rational. It doesn't mean that you're a liar. It doesn't mean that you can't understand evidence. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like, depression is a mental illness. And that wouldn't, I know I'm going a bit far away from hearing voices, but certainly as a general argument strategy, when someone like wants to call someone mentally ill, often it's to try and put you in some kind of group where your arguments, we don't even need to assess your arguments. We don't need to look at your evidence. We don't need to hear you out because I've put you in the box mentally ill. And therefore, I'm the rational one here and you aren't. And that's it. Like, it's nonsense for so many levels. And like, okay, maybe we could just say all religious people are mentally ill. We're going to just put religion in the category mental illness. Like, what does that actually mean? Nothing's changed here. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're all hearing voices, because that's like a different type of mental illness. It doesn't mean they're all depressed. It doesn't mean, they all have general anxiety disorder or something. It just means that we've taken this phenomenon and we've labeled it mental illness, and nothing's changed. It doesn't make anything less credible. It just doesn't add anything. It's just a really cheap argument strategy for people who don't know how to argue. Sorry, I'm ranting.
Hey, thanks for checking out this clip for The Line. While you're here, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then share this with that bitter uncle of yours who loves talking about the good old days.